430,000 years ago, someone suffered two violent blows to the front of the head. There were no police, no witnesses, no written records, and the victim did not belong to our species. Their name disappeared before names could ever be preserved. The object that struck them vanished. So did the individual who used it for almost 500,000 years. The only evidence remained scattered across the floor of a dark cave in northern Spain. Then scientists began putting the pieces back together. What emerged was a nearly complete skull with two strangely similar holes above its left eye. One blow might have been an accident. Two blows made by the same object were much harder to explain. This was not yet proof of murder, but it was the beginning of an investigation into what may be the oldest killing scientists have ever been able to recognize. The cave is called Sima de los Huesos in Spanish. That means the pit of bones. It lies deep inside the Atapuerca cave system, beneath the hills of northern Spain. Reaching it is difficult, even today. A narrow passage leads to a vertical shaft. And at the bottom is a chamber where researchers have recovered thousands of ancient human bones. Among them were 52 fragments that did not appear especially important when they were first removed. Some were discovered years apart. Slowly, over roughly 2 decades, those fragments began to fit together. They formed a skull now known simply as Cranium 17. The pieces belonged to a young adult from an ancient human population closely related to later Neanderthals. We do not know whether the individual was male or female. We do not know what their face looked like in life, but we do know how their skull broke. Above the left eye were 2 deep injuries in the frontal bone. At first, those wounds did not prove an attack. A skull can break in many ways. The individual might have fallen inside the cave. Loose rock might have struck the body. The bones might have cracked under pressure after thousands of years underground. Even the excavation itself might have damaged them. Before scientists could suggest violence, they had to eliminate those possibilities. The first clue came from the edges of the fractures. Bone does not always break in the same way. Dry bone tends to crack in brittle, irregular patterns. Fresh bone still contains moisture and collagen. It can bend slightly before breaking, producing smoother edges and distinctive fracture shapes. The damage on Cranium 17 matched injuries created while the bone was still fresh. In other words, the skull was not simply crushed by the cave hundreds of thousands of years later. Something struck it while the individual was alive, or very close to the time of death, but that still left open the possibility of an accident. Then researchers compared the 2 wounds. They were extremely similar in size and shape. Both contained a matching notch, suggesting that the same hard object created them. But the blows did not enter the skull from exactly the same direction. That detail changed the investigation. Imagine falling onto a sharp rock. Your head might strike it once. But to create 2 separate holes with the same unusual shape, your skull would somehow need to hit the same object twice, near the same location, from different angles. It is not physically impossible, but it is difficult to make that explanation fit the evidence. Falling rocks create another problem. Random stones would be unlikely to strike the same small area twice and leave almost matching wounds. Whatever caused the damage appears to have struck 2 separate times with the same hard, blunt object, and the most likely source of those blows was another hominin. At that moment, the fossil became something more than a damaged skull. It became a crime scene. The exact object is unknown. It may have been stone. It may have been wood. It may have been a tool used for ordinary survival until the moment someone raised it against another member of the group. But nothing survives to identify it. The reconstructed remains preserve the violence, They do not preserve the story around it. We cannot see the attacker, recover the weapon, or reconstruct the motive. We do not know whether the victim saw the first blow coming. We do not know whether the conflict involved fear, anger, rivalry, punishment, or something we would not understand today, and it may not even be technically correct to use the modern legal word murder. Murder implies laws, responsibility, and intent defined by a society. None of those things can be recovered from a fossil. The safest scientific description is lethal interpersonal violence. One hominin appears to have struck another twice, and researchers concluded that the injuries were probably fatal. But even that conclusion creates a new mystery. How did the body reach the bottom of the pit of bones? Cranium 17 was not alone. The chamber contained the remains of many individuals from the same ancient population. Different parts of their skeletons were present, suggesting that complete bodies, not merely isolated bones, may once have entered the cave. Researchers considered several explanations. Perhaps individuals repeatedly fell into the shaft by accident. Perhaps carnivores dragged bodies inside. Perhaps water or geological movement carried the bones there. But none of these possibilities explains the entire pattern easily. The chamber is difficult to reach. The collection does not resemble a simple carnivore den, and there is no clear natural event that obviously carried so many bodies into the same deep location. That has led some researchers to suggest that other hominins deliberately placed the dead inside the cave. It is an extraordinary possibility, if true. Sima de los Huesos may preserve a very early example of humans intentionally handling the bodies of their dead. But deliberate placement is not automatically burial. It does not prove ritual. It does not prove religion, grief, or belief in an afterlife. The bodies may have been placed there for reasons we no longer understand. Scientists still debate exactly how the collection formed. Cranium 17 makes that debate even stranger. If the individual had already suffered fatal trauma before reaching the bottom of the shaft, then someone may have attacked them elsewhere and later. The body somehow joined the others in the cave. Were the people who moved the body also the people who cared about the dead? Did they know the attacker? Was the killer part of the same group? Was placing the body in the cave an act of respect, concealment, or routine? The evidence cannot tell us. It brings us close enough to see that a complicated social world existed, but not close enough to understand its rules. That is why this case matters. It pushes lethal violence much deeper into the human story than civilization. There were no cities, no armies, no kings, no written laws. Agriculture would not appear for hundreds of thousands of years, yet someone may already have been capable of striking another member of their kind not once, but twice. It is tempting to look at that and say violence is our oldest nature, but that would also go beyond the evidence. These ancient humans could not have survived through violence alone. Life demanded cooperation. Individuals depended on one another to find food, raise young, avoid predators, learn landscapes, and preserve knowledge. An isolated hominin was vulnerable. A group could survive. To cooperate, you must remember who helped you and who harmed you. To share, you must recognize fairness and recognize betrayal. The same social mind that allowed ancient humans to care for one another also gave them reasons to fear, punish, and attack. Perhaps violence did not appear because ancient humans lacked social bonds. Perhaps it appeared because those bonds had become complicated. Cranium 17 does not prove that humans are naturally cruel. It reveals something more unsettling. The ability to care for others and the ability to harm them may have developed inside the same social mind. One depends on understanding another person's needs. The other depends on understanding where they are vulnerable. Almost everything else about this case is gone. The victim's face is gone. The attacker is gone. The weapon is gone. The motive is gone. There will be no confession, no trial, no final answer. All that survived were 52 fragments and 2 wounds above an eye. But those wounds lasted. They remained underground while entire human populations appeared and disappeared. They survived the arrival of Neanderthals. They survived the evolution of our own species. They survived agriculture, cities, written law, and every later attempt to define the difference between killing and murder. Then, piece by piece, we found them. This skull does not show us the first murder ever committed. It shows us the oldest one we have managed to recognize. And that difference matters. Because by the time someone raised an object against this young individual, violence was probably not beginning. It already had a past.